This is the 1959 Santiago International Tournament, a memorial tournament, Torneo de Arturo Alessandri Palma, held from April 20th to May 6th, right on the heels of the Mar del Plata tournament. And 8 of the players here at Santiago also played at Mar del Plata. That was a 15-player event, this a 13-player event. Bobby, not having his best event here, tied for 4th place with 7 wins, 4 losses, and a draw. But this event held from April 20th to May 6th, 1959 in Santiago, Chile. 13 grandmasters and masters from Europe, North America, and South America competed. Well, the tournament was fairly important for Fischer, who has only recently begun to compete in international events. Just did not fare so well in this particular event. And part of the reason, according to this, that Fischer and Pachmann, after the Mar del Plata event, kind of went on a tour through South America on their way to Santiago. And apparently, in this event, several rounds, Pachmann was playing Fischer's prep, and Fischer was playing Pachmann's prep. So, you know. And it's been a long, long trip, I think, for the 16-year-old Bobby Fischer. Well, you guys remember when you were that age, no discipline at all, I'm sure. And, you know, stay up till all hours. Who knows? I'm making excuses for him. Simply said, he did not play the best chess of his life in this event, but he played some pretty good chess. The next game was round number 9, played on May the 1st. Rodrigo Flores Alvarez. Flores was born in Santiago, so he is in his native city, is where this tournament was held, is Santiago. He was born August 23rd, 1913, passed away January 17th, 2007. Nice old age of 93. A Chilean chess champion 11 different times. If you're interested, it was in 1931, 35, 38, 41, 44, 50, 51, 52, 56, 61, and 65. That's a 34-year spread between the first time he won the championship and the final time. That's dominance. He was also South American champion at Sao Paulo in 1937, and in 1947 he won the Marshall Chess Club Championship. So we have E4, E5, Knight F3, Knight C6, Bishop B5, a Ruy Lopez, no surprise, Morphy's defense with A6, a Columbus variation with Bishop A4, Knight F6, castles, a closed Spanish with Bishop E7, Rook E1, Pawn B5, Bishop B3, Pawn D6, Pawn C3, Kingside castles, Pawn H3, Paul Kedis's variation, Knight D7 right here, and D4 is played, Knight B6. Now Bobby leaves the opening book, and we saw him play this previously at Portoros. The book move is Knight B to D2 here, and after Bishop F6, the Knight comes to F1, with the idea of transferring to either G3 or E3. Most common reply, by the way, there is Rook E8. You could play, excuse me, it didn't go the right direction. Instead of the book move, if you want to abandon the book, a very popular line is Bishop E3. That gets a star. And that line continues with E takes D4, C takes D4, Knight A5 hitting the bishop, Bishop C2, Pawn C5. We've seen all this kind of thing before. In this line, the knight comes to C4, hitting the bishop, which retreats to C1, hitting the bishop and the pawn, I should say. And after C takes D4, knight takes D4, and the bishop comes to F6. So that's a line that you can consider if you're interested in playing it out that way. Bobby going with D takes E5, and this does follow, if I'm not mistaken. I'm not mistaken. I know we just saw this a few weeks ago at the Portoros Interzonal, Fischer against Mikhail Tal. It was just the previous year in time, in 1958, that we saw this, because I remember making comment about it at the time. So knight takes the E-man right here, and knight takes knight, and pawn takes knight. and queen h5 right there. All this by black was played by Mikhail Tal at Podoros the year before, including queen d6. Knight d2, bishop e6. And this is still following Tal. Queen g6 is probably more solid. It interrogates the white queen and vacates the d6 square for the king's bishop. And I remember pointing out to you guys, and you can check the VOD and correct me if I'm wrong, but I remember saying g6 is probably not as good because it creates the weaknesses here. It does force the queen to go back, though, upon which black will play bishop e6. But you've got these weaknesses in the king's castle. Bishop e6 was the move mimicked by Flores, mimicking still the great Mikhail Tal. Now knight f3 is played, bishop takes the bishop, pawn takes the bishop, knight to d7, pawn to b4, queen to e6. And this is where he deviated from the Tal game. Mikhail Tal played his rook to d8, his king's rook. Got a star for it, too. Queen e6, though, in this game, brings us to uncharted waters. Bishop e3. Now the king's rook comes to d8. Queen f5, not liked by the bot. Bot calling for queen g4. I kind of like the idea of knight g5, right? That threatens checkmate in 2 moves. So he'd have to give up his bishop for the knight, wouldn't he? Right, let's say, knight g5 isn't going to phase a master, but at our level, you play knight g5 and hit his queen, you might just provoke him to say, oh no, my queen, and then you're checkmating him. He got to save his queen at least. At least you didn't get my queen. Saved your queen at the cost of the game. Now it compels bishop takes knight, doesn't it? Okay. Bobby with queen to f5 in this game. So on queen g4, let's just talk about this for a moment. That will likely result in a queen trade. Queen takes queen, pawn takes queen. So that gives you doubled pawns, but the idea is to uncastle and get a rook on the H file. Let's go back. Bobby with queen f5 right there. So now queen takes queen. And sure, if you're going to just offer up the queen trade anyway, I guess the bot is saying you'd rather attack over here than up here, I guess, is what the bot is claiming anyway. Bobby says, why spend a bunch of extra moves to open a file when I can open the file my rook is already on? F6 right here. Rook d1, c5, b takes c5, knight takes c5, bishop takes c5, bishop takes c5. Now king f1, implementing the first rule of the endgame. Activate and centralize your king. b4, so okay, rook takes rook, keeps the eval bar dead center, but it relinquishes the open file. And again, this is the difference between a bot and a human. A human is not going to relinquish control of an open file without a very, 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 very good reason. Or at least he generally shouldn't. Well, b4 is played, and knight to d2, no doubt will also be frowned upon by the bot, and it is. The bot, again, insisting on a rook trade, but neither player willing to relinquish their share of the d file, regardless of the fact that the bot says it's the best choice. Now, the one thing that white does get out of this is this A-man, I suppose. Although you might want to play king e2 first to keep his rook from coming to d1. Yeah, I don't know. If I take here, pawn takes pawn, yeah, it gets an inaccuracy. And the bot did say king e2 first. Okay, let's go back. Knight d2, not liked by fickle bot. Pawn takes pawn, pawn takes pawn, pawn a5. Now king e2. Okay, play rook a4 first is what the bot says. And after rook d3, then play king e2. Bobby says, why let him into d3 to begin with? The point, though, is that we're not worried about rook takes c3 because knight e4 would then be played. Boom. And after rook c2 check, king d3, and black is compelled to give up his bishop for 2 pawns because I'm attacking this and I'm attacking that. So you get this pawn, and then I get your bishop, and then you get that pawn. Taking the bishop is better than taking the rook, by the way, here. A rook's worth 5 and a bishop's worth 3, but you're getting 3 full for 2 instead of getting 5 for 4. 5 for 4. So you gain 1 more point with knight takes bishop, right? Something like that. I don't know. I can't do the math. Just trust the bot. It knows what it's talking about. Generally, you want a full bishop is better than the exchange, is what I'm saying. Okay, let's go back. Bobby played king e2 to preclude rook d3. Doesn't even want to have to deal with it. Now a4, though, precludes rook a4. Knight e4 hits the bishop. Rook d to c8. Defense. King d3. Yeah, knight takes might be more sound, and after rook takes, bring your queen's rook up to defend here, I suppose. Let's go back. King d3 was played, pawn a3, king c2, now rook a7, rook db1, bishop e7, right? Don't play a2 here. This is quite a slick move by Fischer. It's like a psychological move, asking him to push that pawn further. Number one, passed pawns are meant to be pushed. And number two, you give him a target to entice him to push there. But the problem with a2 is it relinquishes control of b2. And so rook can come to b2, creating a super attack on a2. So bishop e7, much better than the idea of a2. Now rook b5 is played. Not like. Yeah. Play g4, cover your f5, and prevent any ideas of h5 as well. Killing 2 birds with a single stone. Instead, rook b5, and now king f7. And the bot says, hey, he didn't play g4. You should play g6. And hit the F-man. Rook A, B1, rook C, C7, G6 again being recommended. So, right, if we play G6, same idea. And then I'm going to play rook B7 here, though. Rook takes rook, rook takes rook. Let me think. Rook, rook, rook takes, and get behind. Because rooks belong behind passed pawns. If takes, takes, and white has to worry about this. He has to play king B1 to be able to blockade, I think. Yes. Let's go back. Rook C, C7 was played instead. Rook D1. And I had thoughts, the bot calling for pawn to F3. I had thoughts of attacking along the back rank here. Oh, I get the big red X. Even though the eval bar is not budged a millimeter with my move, it's the same exact score, but somehow I get a big red X because it's a fickle bot. Well, rook d1, now g6, g4, rook cb7. Yeah, of course, we should mention here that passed pawns are meant to be pushed. Of course, rook a4 also looks interesting, hitting the undefended knight. Play this first. If you defend, g takes f5. Eval bar's dead center. Rook cb7 was played. Rook takes rook. Yeah, I thought c4 might be tempting to play because, after all, passed pawns are meant to be pushed. And if you want to help my pawn up the board, sei meinen Gast. Rook takes rook does get a star. What do I get for that? Just a thumbs up for my idea. Rook takes rook, rook takes rook, rook b1, rook a7, rooks belong behind passed pawns. King b3, ready to blockade on a2. Rook d7 abandons the pawn, looking to come in and infiltrate, perhaps. That would fork the 2 pawns. Oh, the one is defended by my knight, though. King c2, though, says, I don't want you coming in here. So rook a7, rook a1, and again, king b3, but that is looking for a repetition, but the whole point is blockade the pawn with your king and use your rook for other more important tasks. Here g takes f5, g takes f5, rook b7. Once again inviting the capture. Rook a2 here to prevent the rook from coming to b2. Rook c7, king b1, rook b7 check, king a1, rook c7 hitting the pawn-ish. The knight does defend. Rook d2 now, king e8, king a2, rook d7. Rooks are traded. We go to a bishop versus knight endgame. c4, king c6, king b3, interesting. King b6, pawn h4, inaccurate. Bot calling for knight c3, but why not give the check here? You get a thumbs up. And the idea is, yes, I know this is super attacked, but the bishop is overworked. It cannot defend this pawn and attack my pawn both. So in order to capture my passed c-man, he has to give up the f-man, giving me a passed f-man, which is further away from his king than my c-man was. And you'd rather have your passed pawn further away from the king. The king can't stop this pawn without stepping into this square that I've got marked with these arrows. And if you pick up this pawn, I'd pick up your h-man. Come back. h4 was played, king c6, pawn h5, king b6, knight c3. That's going to win if you allow the check, because that's a Forcosaurus. Forcosaurus Rex. But king c5, knight d5 anyway, hits the bishop, which retreats to d8. a2 might be in the works, and the point, of course, is to decoy the king away from the c-man. So knight e3 defends, king d4 is played. I like the idea of bishop a5 here and get behind white's forces. King d4, what did I get for bishop a5? Oh, I got just a check mark. Okay. King d4. Now king takes the a-man, and king e4 is inaccurate, apparently. The bot calling for king d3. Right, I mean, your only other choice is to retreat and blockade and defend and just straight out play for the draw. We'll come to that idea in a moment. Let's look at the bot's idea is to come here, although the eval bar lunges in white's favor when you go this route, but you maintain temporary contact here, tethering the knight to that pawn temporarily, but the idea is to come back and attack in this direction. Instead, king e4 was played, but my thought was just block. Okay, I get a question mark on that, even though the eval bar bears me out. Now, this is hilarious, as always, Ficklebot. When Flores plays king e4, Ficklebot says it's inaccurate. But when I play king c5, the bot says you should have played king e4. Well, make up your mind, Ficklebot. Make up your mind. But king c5 seems like it's blockading. I don't know why. Okay, anyway, king e4 was played and marked inaccurate until I suggested king c5, and then the bot said, oh no, king e4 is the best move after all. Ficklebot. King b4, white has to play c5 here. Passed pawns are meant to be pushed. Instead, king b4 was played. King f3, pawn c5 now. King takes the f-man on f2. Knight g4, Checosaurus. King g3, knight takes the f-man. Bishop takes the knight, c6. Bishop is forced back to d8. He's got to stop the pawn from coming to c7. Now, white has to worry about pawn e4, but Bobby says, you know what? Your bishop is overworked. I'm going to push to f6. Flores says, okay, e4 it is then, wanting the e3 square for the win. So f7 and check, buys himself a move. Oh, and they agreed to a draw here. And the eval bar concurs. So there you go, ladles and jelly spoons. Let's look at the numbers. The numbers. 96.4 accuracy for Bobby, 96.7 for his opponent, Rodrigo Flores Alvarez. 96.7. Impeccable. Very competitive game. Black was just on the next level in the opening. Bobby, of course, always strong in the opening, but an incredible middle game by both players, as well as pristine precision in the end game by both. 2850 performance rating there for Bobby.